Okay, so you guys want to hear about being an ADHD woman and how to handle your money. So we're going to do an entire series on it. But first we have to kind of understand, like, we have to lay the foundation. We have to lay the groundwork. So some of this you may already know, some of it you may not know. So you can hold here for 2x, but we're going to kind of lay the foundation for just the basics of like being a woman with ADHD and what that means for us in terms of finances. So let me tell you a quick story. When I was growing up, my family was very like standard middle class family. We didn't have like loads and loads of money, but I never went to bed hungry, right? When I graduated college, I was dating a guy at the time who had a really, really good job. He had a really solid job with the government. And I basically knew that if I needed to, I could fall back on him as sort of like plan B if like the plans I had at the time didn't work out. Okay, well, plot twist. Not only did the plans that I had for my life not work out, we also broke up. LOL. So what that taught me though, was that I was terrible with money. I had no idea how anything in personal finance worked. I ended up having all of these credit cards because I had started my own business right out of college. I maxed out like literally every single one of them, treated it like it was monopoly money, knew nothing about credit cards, knew nothing about how to pay them back, knew nothing about how loans worked, nothing. I had no knowledge of personal finance, okay? And that's not on anybody. Like that's, I don't blame my parents for that. Like it just is what it is. So basically what happened is that during that time, I was getting really into self-help and personal development, and that led me into the realm of personal finance. And so I just started reading everything. I just started reading as many personal finance books as I could. Now listen, I'm not an expert. I'm not a financial planner. I'm not a therapist. I can't diagnose or treat you for ADHD. These are all things that you should know ahead of time. But I do have a pretty solid and robust knowledge library of like personal finance and ADHD and how those two things coalesce because they very much are connected. So a lot of this was like trial and error, right? I was just like trying things, seeing if it worked. And ultimately there are much broader like conversations to be had around personal finance and about like managing money because like A, we live in a capitalistic society, B, women still do not make as much as men. And so that's like there's a feminist piece to it that is also a subset of this conversation. And then also being somebody who has a disability. ADHD is classified as a disability. Like when you're filling out a job application, that big list of disabilities, yeah, ADHD's on there. So kind of just some basic info if you don't already know this. Okay, so ADHD, that means that you have a lack of dopamine that's happening in your brain. Dopamine's a neurotransmitter. It's responsible for the reward center in your brain, the pleasure center. So like we get more dopamine by movement, listening to your favorite music, eating dark chocolate, eating really good food, having sex, drinking, drugs, all of those things, shopping. Like you get a little dopamine boost from all of those activities. There's more, but those are the main ones I'm going to list for now. And so ADHD brains just don't produce the same amount of dopamine as a neurotypical brain, which is the average person's brain. So this can lead to ADHD people, specifically women, doing dopamine seeking behaviors. So things that would bring us dopamine that may or may not be like helpful to us in that moment, but they give us the dopamine hit that our brain needs to kind of like keep going. Things like, placing an order on Amazon or, having a glass of wine, those types of things. Maybe having a lot of sexual partners, So where this all ties in with personal finance is that a lot of times those dopamine seeking behaviors have something to do with our finances. If you are impulse shopping because you are, not getting the dopamine that you need either through medication management, through your physician and your therapist, or you are, maybe not doing the exercise that you and your therapist talked about, you're not doing the behaviors that really cultivate that dopamine for you. Yeah, that can really impact your money, dude. Now, all of this gets further complicated and further complex because we're women, right? So we have 28-day cycles, right? So our hormone fluctuations during our cycles, 28 to, 35-ish usually days, our hormone fluctuations during those cycles are also impacting dopamine production. So you can imagine that this gets kind of complicated. I was just talking to my sister about this, she's a therapist who specializes in working with neurodiverse clients. And I was just saying how in my luteal phase, that is like the number one thing I want to do. I want to scroll on Amazon and add everything to my cart. And so what a lot of traditional personal finance advice does not take into account is all of these factors, how dopamine plays a role in money and how we spend money, and how shopping and purchasing and even things like drinking, all of those things are backed by money. And so that's kind of a key piece that is left out of the conversation around personal finance, is it's all geared towards neurotypical people. And so sure, it can be really easy for a neurotypical person who's in the personal finance space to say, well, just stop impulse spending. What's wrong with you? And as a neurodivergent person, you're like, I can't. It's the way that I get dopamine. That is if you're not, properly medicated and all of those things. Okay, so those are the basics. That's the groundwork. That's what we're starting with. So those are kind of the basic components that people need to understand about being an ADHD person and your money. Oh, the last component of this, that is arguably one of the more important ones. A lot of women who have ADHD who are also diagnosed later in life, a lot of those women are like high achievers, high performers. That's how I was. I was an incredibly high achiever and high performer until I was diagnosed. I mean, I still am to a degree because like that's kind of the nature, I think, of being a woman. But like I did that for a lot of my life. And what that looked like in my marriage is it looked like taking on the role of the person who was going to be in charge of the finances. And so it also looked like me being a high achiever and having so much shame around my money and around like the way that I viewed money and the way that I made money, that I basically forced myself to like learn as much as I could about money. And so while that's not a behavior I recommend, it did serve me in ways in the sense that like, I do feel like I have a good understanding of my finances now. I do feel like I'm in a good spot financially, all of that. So that's kind of another key component of all of this, is that sometimes there is a really high achieving, high performing woman who is neurodiverse, who is kind of leading the charge on finances in her household or in her marriage, relationship, whatever. And she may still not know all of the moving parts, but she has chosen to take on that role solely because she is a high achiever. So if any of that sounds like you and you want to follow along, stay tuned. More parts to come.